Salve discipuli, hello sixth grade, and welcome to Latin class this week. Starting this week, we're switching things up a bit. We are going to be doing some units on Greek mythology, which is one of my favorite topics about studying the ancient world. So Greek mythology and Roman mythology, in fact, are very intertwined. The Romans adopted a lot of the stories from Greek mythology. And we're going to still be incorporating Latin into a lot of our lessons, so don't worry about that. But we're going to kind of switch gears on how we're doing our lessons. So this week, we are going to be learning about the Titans and the Olympians and kind of the origin stories of Greek mythology. So let me get my slides started. All right, so Greek mythology, Titans, and the Olympians. Now we're going to be sort of basing most of our stories off of Delaire's Greek Myths, book of Greek Myths. So this is a very famous, very popular book of Greek mythology for schools. So we're going to be using this one. I've used this book for years. Many people do. But we're going to kind of build off of it and add on to things. So just a couple of notes before we jump into the stories themselves. This is going to be broken up into 2 videos, and they probably will be a little bit longer videos because I will be reading stories to you guys and adding things in. So just keep that in mind. Feel free to pause whenever you need to take a break. You don't have to watch it all in one go, all right? So let's get started. So Greek mythology, right? Mythology in general are stories told by a culture to explain the world they lived in. Now, Greek mythology typically focuses on things that explain why the world is the way it is, why things in nature happen the way they do, why certain things are the way they are. And they often focus on the lives and activities of gods, heroes, and mythological creatures and all of their interactions. So a lot of these stories are very fantastical, but there are a lot of myths that do have some historical pieces to them, which are really interesting. Now, most of the myths we're going to be covering are not necessarily those where we don't have any evidence of any of the pieces of the story being true, but these are just stories that were told by the ancient Greeks to explain their world. Now, before there was a writing system, right? They didn't always have a writing system in ancient Greece. They didn't have books or things like that. So before that became a thing, these stories were just told orally through the oral tradition of poets and storytellers traveling from town to town, telling their stories. They would memorize these stories, and then it was like a performance. It was like how we go to the movies nowadays. That would have been how people shared their stories. And this is a kind of a really interesting thing that happened, is that because of this, there's a lot of different versions of the same myth. So think of it like a game of telephone. When you whisper something to someone, then they whisper it to another person, they whisper to another person, and you might kind of keep the general sense of everything the same, but little details might get shifted here or there based on how you heard it or how you remembered it before you passed it along. So there's a lot of these myths where certain little details might vary from story to story, from version to version. So what you get is kind of this this collection of all of these stories with, depending on where the story was told and the area it was told, and you might have some different details included. So like I said, we will be focusing on this particular book and the versions of the myths as told in here, but I will elaborate from time to time, give you more information that is not included in this story, or I will also sometimes explain some differences that might exist in some of the myths that you may come across later on in your life, depending on what book you read. So eventually these stories were written down once they did develop a writing system, and that's how we still know them today. There's many authors that wrote down versions of these stories, and we still have examples of that in ancient Greek, the language, and also in Latin. We have quite a few myths written by Latin authors as well. So as I said, we're following from Delaire's book of Greek Myths. So how this is going to work is I will be reading the stories from here to you, I've got some kind of fun slides with images to go along and correspond to the stories as we're going through them. And then on Google Classroom, if you haven't seen it yet, I did post some notes for you to fill in as we're going through the lesson. So either print those out or have them in like a separate page so that you can fill in the blanks in the notes as we go along and read through the stories together. So make sure you're filling those in as we go, all right? Okay, so first we have a little quote. "Sing this to me, muses, you who dwell on Olympus. From the beginning, tell me which of the gods came first to be." And this is from an author, Hesiod, and his Theogony. Or theogony. I'm used to the hard G's. So a cosmogony is a story that explains the origins of the world. This comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world. And then theogony. I always want to say theogony. I'm not sure if it's theogony or theogony. A story that explains the origins of the gods. Theos is the Greek word for gods. So this is a book written by Hesiod. He was a poet. This is written in the 8th century BC, so a very, very long time ago. That is an elaborate hymn to Zeus. This is the sky god, right, as we will learn. So Hesiod, right, knows that we need to start a story at the beginning. So that's where we're going to jump into things. So we are starting off with Cronus and the Titans, so make sure you have your notes ready. And I will show you the images in the book as well as the ones on this slide. So in olden times, when men still worshipped ugly idols, there lived in the land of Greece a folk of shepherds and herdsmen who cherished light and beauty. They did not worship dark idols like their neighbors, but created instead their own beautiful, radiant gods. The Greek gods looked much like people and acted like them too, only they were taller, handsomer, and could do no wrong. Fire-breathing monsters and beasts with many heads stood for all that was dark and wicked. They were for gods and great heroes to conquer. The gods lived on top of Olympus, a mountain so high and steep that no man could climb it and see them in their shining palace. But they often descended to earth, sometimes in their own shapes, sometimes disguised as humans or animals. Mortals worshipped the gods, and the gods honored Mother Earth. They had all sprung from her, for she was the beginning of all life. And there's this kind of cool map on this page just of the ancient world there. All right, now let's talk about Mother Earth. So on this slide, I do have sort of a few bonus deities, primordial deities, that are in Greek mythology. This particular textbook doesn't really get into most of them. We're going to focus on these two right here. And we'll talk a little bit about this one and this one over here. So we're not really going to get into too many of these, but in the beginning, it starts off with chaos. And chaos is kind of like this nothingness at this time. And then chaos just kind of, out of chaos comes various things, one of them being Mother Earth, or Gaia. Now, we're going to spell Gaia Gaea in our notes, because that's how this particular book is spelling it. So in your notes, spell Gaia Gaea. All right? So we're going to focus on Gaia and her story. Gaia, the earth, came out of darkness so long ago that nobody knows when or how. And like I said, the Greeks believed Gaia just came out of chaos. It was just kind of created. Earth was young and lonesome, for nothing lived on her yet. Above her rose Uranus, the sky, dark and blue, set all over with sparkling stars. He was magnificent to behold, and young Earth looked up at him and fell in love. Sky smiled down at Earth, twinkling with his countless stars, and they were joined in love. Soon young Earth became Mother Earth, the mother of all things living. All her children loved their warm, bountiful mother, and feared their mighty father, Uranus, Lord of the universe. So here, this is actually a picture from this book that I have nice and magnified for you guys. So this is the depiction of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, Mother Earth. I think it's a really pretty picture there. All right, moving on to the Titans. The Titans were the first children of Mother Earth. They were the first gods, taller than the mountains she created to serve them as thrones, and both earth and sky were proud of them. There were 6 Titans, 6 glorious gods, and they had 6 sisters, the Titanesses, whom they took for their wives. So here, these are the original Titans, some of the original Titans here. These are just kind of the ones that got married, and then the other ones are thrown about here and there. So here's some of the Titans, and then these are some of their children, which we're not going to get to know very well in this story. When Gaia again gave birth, Uranus was not proud. Their new children were also huge, but each one only had one glowing eye set in the middle of his forehead. They were the 3 Cyclopes, and they were named Lightning, Thunder, and Thunderbolt. And they actually do have Greek names. They're called Briares, Cotys, and Arges, Brontes, and Steropes. I'm thinking of the next ones. Arges, Brontes, and Steropes. And their names are, these are names that mean or meant in Greek bright, thunderer, and lightener. So this book calls them Lightning, Thunder, and Thunderbolt, which is close enough. They were not handsome gods, but tremendously strong smiths. Sparks from their heavy hammers flashed across the sky and lit up the heavens so brightly that even their father's stars faded. After a while, Mother Earth bore 3 more sons. Uranus looked at them with disgust. Each of them had 50 heads and 100 strong arms. He hated to see such ugly creatures walk about on lovely Earth. So he seized them and their brothers, the Cyclopes, and flung them into Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit under the earth. So these are the 100-handed ones. In Greek, they're called the Hekatonkaires. And so these are the ones that are Briares, Gyges, and Cotys, and that translates to the vigorous, the big-limbed, and the striker. So quite monstrous, frightening-looking creatures, aren't they? And then here's the image in the book that I have here. So we've got the lovely shining Titans there, and then the 100-handed ones are down here, and the Cyclopes are over here. So they all get thrown into Tartarus, poor things. Mother Earth loved her children and could not forgive her husband for his cruelty to them. Out of hardest flint, she fashioned a sickle and spoke to her sons, the Titans. A sickle, spelled S-I-C-K-L-E. It's like kind of like a scythe. It's like the curved blade, but it's a shorter version that we typically think of as using for like harvesting and things. So in here it's a weapon, and let me see if I can show you guys. That's it right there that he's holding. So that's that curved blade there. It's a sickle. So she spoke to the Titans. Mother Earth had this made. Take this weapon and make an end to your father's cruelty and set your brothers free. Fear took hold of 5 of the Titans, and they trembled and refused. Only Cronus, the youngest but the strongest, dared to take the sickle. He fell upon his father. Uranus could not withstand the weapon wielded by his strong son, and he fled, giving up his powers. Mother Earth made Pontus, the boundless seas, her second husband, and from this union sprang the gods of the watery depths. And from her rich ground grew an abundance of trees and flowers, and out of her crevices sprites, beasts, and earthly man crept forth. Cronus was now lord of the universe. He sat on the highest mountain and ruled over heaven and earth with a firm hand. The other gods obeyed his will, and early man worshipped him. This was man's golden age. Men lived happily and in peace with the gods and each other. They did not kill, and they had no locks on their doors, for theft had not yet been invented. But Cronus did not set his monstrous brothers free, and Mother Earth was angry with him and plotted his downfall. She had to wait, for no god yet born was strong enough to oppose him. But she knew that one of his sons would be stronger than he, just as Cronus had been stronger than his father. Cronus knew it too. So every time his Titaness wife, Rhea, gave birth, he took the newborn god and swallowed it. With all his offspring securely inside him, he had nothing to fear. So there's this one I have on here on the slides. This is an image of what's going to happen next. But here's an image of Cronus, right? And then you can kind of see in his belly, they've put some of the faces of his children that he's swallowed whole, right? And his wife is Rhea, R-H-E-A, Rhea. But Rhea mourned. I mean, her husband is swallowing all of her children. I'd be a little upset too. Her 5 sisters, who had married the 5 other Titans, were surrounded by their Titan children, while she was all alone. When Rhea expected her 6th child, she asked Mother Earth to help her save the child from his father. That was just what Mother Earth had been waiting for. She gave her daughter whispered advice, and Rhea went away smiling. As soon as Rhea had borne her child, the god Zeus, she hid him. Then she wrapped a stone in baby clothes and gave it to her husband to swallow instead of her son. Cronus was fooled and swallowed the stone, and the little god Zeus was spirited away to a secret cave on the island of Crete. Old Cronus never heard the cries of his young son, for Mother Earth set noisy earth sprites outside the cave. They made such a clatter, beating their shields with their swords, that other sounds were drowned out. And then here in the book is Rhea taking baby Zeus away. And so in this image here on the slide, we have her handing the swaddled stone to Cronus, who just wasn't even paying attention, apparently, didn't even look to see if it was an actual baby, and just swallowed it whole because he'd already swallowed 5 of his children at this point. All right, so that is the first part of our story. This is the beginning of the mythology and then the introduction to the Titans. And in our next video, we're going to talk about the rise of Zeus and the other gods and goddesses and the end of the time of the Titans. So remember to fill in your notes, right? Go back, make sure you got everything filled in those blank spaces. And then whenever you're ready, you can head on to the next video. So I will see you in part 2, Zeus and the Olympians. Walete.